Well, we're going to kind of breeze through what the study is and dive into what it means. And the previous speaker talked a lot about a public health approach and thinking about stepping back and understanding this problem. And I think that what we'll find in this presentation is that we're even going to take a bigger step back to understand what might be prompting drug use among a lot of these mothers and parents of these really vulnerable kids. And I'd like to have a very interactive presentation. So even though there are like 150 of you in the room, I'm going to try to make it go back and forth because I know it's after lunch and everybody's settling down, and I want this to be what you need it to be. So just diving in, why are we all here in this room today? We are all here in this room listening to these really terrible statistics because every single one of us has hope that there can be a difference for these kids' lives, for our community's lives, and for the lives of people in our nation. We heard about the statistics about how it really impacts every single one of us. Even if NAS doesn't impact us directly, it impacts us through the costs associated with the medical care or the tax burden, right? And so as we take a step back today, we'll explore how ACEs and understanding ACEs and addressing ACEs is yet another strategy to tackling substance abuse among individuals. So diving in really quickly for the few of you that may not know about the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, it is probably the largest public health study that nobody knows about. I think there's actually an article headline that says that in the Huffington Post. And it's so interesting because this study was done over 15 years ago, and it was done by the Kaiser Permanente, which is a huge healthcare organization that exists mostly on the West Coast, and the Centers for Disease Control. And so it actually started in an obesity clinic. You had a physician who had a trial going on basically and he was type A like many of us, and found out that many of the people who were participating in his trial were dropping out even when they were losing weight. And that confounded him. He said, these people are ruining my study. What is going on here? Why are they dropping out, especially when they're successful? So he began to do these one-on-one interviews, and almost by accident found that a strong common denominator of these dropouts was child trauma, specifically child sexual abuse. He asked the question, how much did you weigh when you were first sexually active? And a respondent said 40 pounds, right? So that can only mean that this respondent was a child. So that got him wondering, what was the relationship between different types of childhood adversity and health risk behaviors and maybe even chronic disease? And at the time in the mid-90s, the research wasn't nearly as solid as it is today. So he partnered up with an epidemiologist at the Centers for Disease Control, and together they came up with a 10-question questionnaire based on the limited research at the time, which they called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Questionnaire. So you got a score between 0 and 10, and the 10 types of things that they looked at included 3 types of physical abuse, which included, abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, and sexual abuse, 2 types of neglect, physical neglect and emotional neglect, and 5 types of household dysfunction, which included having a parent with mental health issues, having an incarcerated relative, having a mother treated violently, a parent who abused substances, and divorce in your home. Do we think that those are the only types of adversity that a kid might experience? Definitely not, right? But these are just the 10 types that they looked at. And so what they found was, you got a score between 0 and 10. This either happened to you or it didn't happen to you. And they looked at the scores of 17,000 patients, which is a huge, huge sample size, right? And so these were all folks that were a part of the Kaiser Permanente San Diego kind of membership base. So what do we know about San Diego? Is it cheap to live there? No, there'd be a lot more people living there if it was cheap to live there. It's beautiful. And the thing about Kaiser Permanente is they are an insurer and a provider. So that meant that all these 17,000 people were privately insured. They were not our vulnerable population. They were people like me and you. They were mostly college educated, mostly professional, individuals, who had some benefits, right? And so what they did when they disseminated this 10-question questionnaire to these 17,000 people is they were able to look at their ACE score, their Adverse Childhood Experiences score, and compare that to all of the health data that they had on these individuals. And what they found was striking. So would many of us agree or, say, yeah, I basically get that if you have experienced childhood trauma, that might contribute to mental health issues, right? Most of us agree with that. Do many of us agree that it might contribute to social issues, like incarceration or teen pregnancy, whatever? Yeah, that doesn't even make people raise an eyebrow. But to learn that experiencing child trauma was connected to some of our most pervasive health risk behaviors, and 7 out of 10 of our chronic diseases was something that really wasn't previously known. And that's exactly what they found. They found that ACEs were, or a higher ACE score was connected to much higher rates of heart disease, of cancer, of diabetes, and stroke. Can anybody in this room say that they have not been impacted by one of these in some form or fashion? That you don't know somebody, family member or friend, who has been affected by one of these diseases? Can anybody raise their hand? No. We are so affected by these. Heart disease is one of our leading killers, right? And so to say that there was a relationship between the number or the types of adversity and the number of adversities you had as a child and cancer or heart disease did raise an eyebrow, right? People did not, they didn't know how to explain that. And so originally with this study, they had a pretty difficult time getting it published. But you had some of your early adopters that wanted to know more. These were respected institutions. And as the study began to be replicated, the scientific community wanted to understand what was the biological basis that explained the relationship between childhood trauma and not only social issues and mental health issues, but also health risk behaviors and disease and early death. So I always find that it is easiest to talk about new information in the context of a story. So I'm going to tell you the story of Anthony, little 3-year-old Anthony. Anthony is not his real name. This is not his picture. This is totally stolen from the internet. But it's up there for the purposes of a visual. Because we always respond better to a visual, but the story of Anthony is a very real story. I want all of you to close your eyes, and I want you to imagine that Anthony gets up this morning at 6 a.m. He's hungry. He goes downstairs to the kitchen to try to find something to eat, and when he flicks on the light switch, cockroaches scurry. The thing that you don't know about Anthony is, first of all, there's nothing to really find to eat in his kitchen. All he can find to eat are still tortilla chips. And the other thing that you don't know about him is that he was awake until 2 o'clock in the morning the night before, listening to his mom and her boyfriend physically fight, abuse substances, and drink alcohol. And this little 3-year-old dude was experiencing a living nightmare. It means that he's only had 4 hours of sleep. And because of what happened last night, his mom won't be awake for another 5 hours, meaning he'll be caring for himself unsupervised. Why does Anthony matter to you? Open your eyes. So we'll be talking a lot today about what is happening at the biological level that compromises health across the lifespan, and we'll be using Anthony as an example as we kind of follow his life trajectory. So the very first thing that helped some of these scientists put the pieces together as it related to childhood trauma and health was understanding brain development and how brains optimally develop. And so many of you, many of you may know this because you work with infants, but the general population does not realize how rapidly brains grow in the early years of life. While kids are in the womb, up to 3 years old, most of brain growth happens. And what we see is that in those first 3 years of life, 700 neural connections are made per second, which means that this is a time for immense opportunity, but also immense vulnerability, right? But yet, most parents are not aware of this fact. Most people are not aware of this fact. How do most people think about babies? Do they think that they're affected that much by stress or trauma? No. They can't remember it. They're resilient. This is my get out of jail free card, so to speak. These first 3 years of life, because they can't remember what's happening like it's a book or a movie in their heads, it means that they're less affected, right? And so when you present a general audience with kind of a case study of 3 kids who might be in the same domestic violence situation, and one of them is 6 months old, one of them is 2 years old, and one of them is 10 years old, most people will say to you, oh, the 10-year-old is the one that's most affected by the domestic violence. But the reality is that the 6-month-old is the one most affected by the domestic violence. And that's because of this rapid, active brain development that is happening. These infants are so vulnerable to stress and toxins and their environment. It's unreal. And so that's why we've got all these 3-year-olds that walk around, they look like bobblehead dolls, because they've got these giant brains, almost adult-sized brains, on little stick bodies, right? Have you ever noticed that a baby's head is like the same size as its torso? It's because its brain is actively, rapidly growing. And if we looked like that, it would look very bizarre. So, when we think about public health and we think about why this is important, it's that so many people who interact with families and parents themselves don't understand the sensitivity and importance of this time, and we've got to change that, right? So what you see here is you see synaptic connections from newborn to adult. What do you notice there at 2 years versus adult? It's incredibly similar, right? So there's actually more connections at 2 years old than there are as an adult. The ones that you see in the adult brain are thicker, more hardwired, so to speak, to put it in layman's terms. But you don't see that much of a difference, and that is just a great visualization of the rapid neurodevelopment that's happening. And what we know about neurodevelopment with kids is that optimal development happens in the context of healthy relationships. I think that a lot of folks do not understand that the brain is a social organ, right? And so architecturally, it is built in context of the environment, especially the more advanced parts of your brain. But most folks think, oh, the brain grows just like your skin would grow or any other organ grows, but that's not true. And so babies' brains optimally develop, they look healthiest when they are in the presence of a safe, stable, nurturing caregiver that can meaningfully interact with them and help them form those healthy neural connections. So what derails this? Stress, right? Stress derails healthy brain development. Do we all know that stress is toxic to us as adults? What are some of the outcomes of stress for us as adults? Just start listing them off. High blood pressure, heart attacks, strokes, diabetes, lower immune system, disrupted sleep, relationship problems, mental health issues. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. So if stress is toxic for us as adults, it's much more toxic for kids because of this rapid brain development that is occurring. And not just rapid brain development, but their bodies are developing as well. So that was kind of the very first piece, puzzle piece that they put together when they began to understand how ACEs compromise health across the lifespan, because they were able to document how this stress is toxic to that neurodevelopment. So what do I mean by toxic stress? Not all stress is toxic. There is positive stress. Is any of us free from stress as an adult? No. We need to know how to cope with it as a kid. So positive stress for kids looks like a spelling test. It looks like trying out for the soccer team. It looks like your first day of school, right? And what do you notice under that positive stress graph? It comes back down to baseline, basically. It peaks and it comes back down to baseline. That is good, all right? That prepares kids for the future. Tolerable stress is a stressor that occurs where it might be more severe, but the differentiating factor is that you have the presence of a caregiver that is nurturing, right? So what that looks like is it might look like a serious injury. It might look like the death of a primary caregiver. It might look like an incidence of child sexual abuse, right? But the difference in what makes it tolerable is that this kid has an adult in their life that they can trust and they know will keep them safe and help them get through it, right? And what do you notice about that graph? There's a couple more peaks and it takes a little bit longer, but eventually it goes back down to baseline, okay? But then what I mean by toxic stress is I mean severe and persistent stress without the presence of a nurturing caregiver, right? Kids are dependent on adults to help them regulate, help them deal with stress because they are not mature enough to deal with it on their own, okay? And so when they don't have that, the stress levels stay up. So what causes this stress? What do I mean by toxic stress? When we are confronted with something that we think threatens us, threatens our survival, so to speak, our HPA axis, hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, goes off. And what I would like you all to do now, and you're going to be like, do I have to close my eyes again? Close your eyes again, okay? One more time, last time. And I want you to think about a time where you were really scared. And I want you to notice how your body is responding to that memory. I don't know if it looks like you almost rear-ended somebody, or you lost your kid in the store for more than 5 minutes. But open your eyes. Any brave soul willing to share their scary experience with the group? Come on. There we go. Yeah. Okay, so she was attacked by a man wearing a ski mask on a walking trail. And she said 23 years ago, did you have any physiological responses to that memory?
Yes, I got chills.
You got chills, yeah. Okay, nobody else needs to share their story, but are some other folks willing to share with me some of the physiological responses they had to the memories?
Heart sped up.
Your heart sped up. What else? Chest hurt? Anybody's muscles tense up? Yeah. Anybody sweating? Anybody's stomach kind of hurting? Yeah. Some people hate this exercise. They're like, why did you make me do this? I don't want to remember a bad memory, right? But there's a point in this. That is your HPA axis. And it is responsible for pumping adrenaline through your body to get you ready for fight, flight, or freeze whenever you are confronted with something that threatens your survival, right? And we notice physiological changes in our bodies as a result of this. We notice that we tense up. We notice that our heart rate speeds up and that our breathing increases. And that's all getting us ready to either be aggressive, to run away, or to just, play dead or be still or whatever. And, freeze looks like a lot of different things. Freeze can look like you're literally frozen, or freeze can look like you're a spacey kid. And the same thing for flee, you know. A lot of people connect dissociative symptoms to fleeing, all right? And so this is what we do. And for most of you, you probably don't have that experience on a daily basis, do you? No, right? We don't have this happen to us 5 times a day. So when our HPA axis, revs up, it's a good thing, right? It is a survival mechanism. So if we're about to be hit by a car coming down the road at 70 miles an hour, we don't want to think about it too hard. We want our body to go into survival mode, jump back away from that car, say, whew, right? We don't want to say, ooh, it seems like that car is going 70 miles an hour. I'm kind of in the road. You know, we don't need to be too logical about it, all right? And so it's not harmful to us in moderate amounts. But the reason that I had you think about this memory today is because I want us to start to understand how being triggered can activate this system over and over and over again. What you see here with this visual is you see that when you go into survival mode, fight, flight, or freeze, your learning thinking brain, or your prefrontal cortex, shuts off, and your limbic system, your more emotional part of your brain, a more primitive part of your brain, turns on. So when you think about a mama bear, right? This is a part of our brain that we share with mammals. When you think about a mama bear whose cub thinks that you're about to threaten her cub, what does she do? You're going to be dead, right? She is going to be attacking you, right? And so you can think about the similarity there, right? Is that a lot of times we kind of go to this more primitive, more emotional part of our brain when we think that our survival is compromised. And so I want us to think again about Anthony. In the 30-second story that I gave you, we know that Anthony has an ACE score of 4, right? At least. He has domestic violence in his home, substance abuse in his home, he's got environmental neglect, and he's got emotional neglect, right? And he's only 3 years old. So I want us to think about Anthony when he's 10, and he's in a classroom, and he's taking a test. And he's sitting in that classroom, and down the hall, a door slams. And nobody else in the room notices, including the teacher, notices that that door slams. But Anthony does. And Anthony goes into freeze mode. Why do you think that is? Yeah, it's a trigger. It's a trigger, right? It might remind him of the violence, the domestic violence in his home. To Anthony, a slamming door means something so much different to any other kid that comes from a healthy home. They're able to tune it out. But for him, it signals danger, 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 right? So he's there, and he's taking this test, and all of a sudden, his learning brain shuts down, his limbic brain takes over, his heart is racing, he's freezing up, his muscles are literally tensing up, he's sweating. And then he's having to kind of slowly come back down. He's starting to come back down to baseline and realize, oh, it was just a slamming door. I'm at school, you know, I'm safe. It's okay, you know. And he may not be thinking about that so directly, but, you know, basically, almost subconsciously, that's what he's thinking as he's kind of getting himself back down to baseline. But Anthony's teacher sees Anthony spacing out and thinks to herself, there he goes again. He is not doing his work again. I'm going to pick on Lacey here because she's safe. And so, and she's at the front of the room. So, you know, she comes over to Anthony. She gets in his personal space. She puts her hand on his desk, and she says, Anthony, I need for you to get back to work. Now, was that teacher yelling at Anthony? Was that teacher's face very angry? No. But Anthony is not even all the way calmed down from the first trigger, right? So what do you think that Anthony does this time? Yeah, we know this story. We've worked with Anthony's before. We've seen Anthony's before. He's going to react, right? And he pushes his test off the desk, and he says, I'm not doing this effing test, right? And he screams and yells. And then that might have been the second or third time that Anthony's done that month. and then he gets sent to the principal's office, and what do you think happens? Suspended. Add insult to injury, this kid who is sent home to a truly terrifying environment where he really does need to engage his survival skills. So the reason I bring that up is because the folks that we are working with that are abusing substances are oftentimes, not always, but more times than not, the Anthonys of the world, right? So they are individuals who have very high ACE scores, who come from incredibly traumatic environments, and to add insult to injury, that survival skill has always been adaptive and worked for them in their home, but it attracts more stress in real life, doesn't it? School is another stressful and traumatic place for Anthony, and Anthony's teacher doesn't know how to appropriately respond. And how do you think that Anthony's teacher thinks about him? He's a bad kid. He's just a bad kid. He's a willfully defiant kid. And I can tell you, Anthony did not walk into class that day thinking to himself, I think I'm going to space out, and then I'm going to flip out, and I'm going to get suspended and go back to my home with no food, right? That's not premeditated. But a lot of times without this knowledge of what's going on internally, people judge the Anthonys of the world and think that they're bad, willfully defiant individuals. So moving along, to me, this is an incredibly powerful graphic, and I'll tell you why. Most people understand physical abuse, and most people understand sexual abuse, because if you were hit or if you were sexually assaulted, you can understand how that would make you feel unsafe and compromise your boundaries and a host of other things, right? We can wrap our minds around that. But it's harder for any of us to understand the impact of neglect and why it's traumatizing to a child. Because if I left any of you alone, even the most extroverts, the greatest extroverts of you, alone for 3 days straight, it would not traumatize you, right? You might, lay in the middle of the bed, binge on Netflix. You'd be like, yes. A lot of you would say, please leave me alone for 3 days straight, right? But for kids who are developmentally dependent on nurturing caregivers, neglect is incredibly traumatizing. And for two reasons. It's scary, right, because you're so dependent, but also when you don't have the opportunities to interact with adults, you're not creating those early structures for healthy neurodevelopment, basically. It's compromising the architecture of your developing brain. And so what you see in this graphic is you see the brain of a child who comes from a safe, stable, nurturing home on your left, and the brain of a child who is extremely neglected on your right. And what's the very first thing you notice about that brain on your right? Smaller. What's the second thing you notice? Black spots, okay? That's what people say. That is empty space. That's lack of volume, all right? And so we can see how much neglect compromises the developing brain. And you can only imagine how that compromises critical thinking and behavior across the lifespan. So in full transparency, we do not see kids that suffer this level of neglect in the United States often, but the purpose of this visual is to show you how brain architecture is truly compromised. And to a discerning eye, when you look at the brains of kids who have been mistreated, who have experienced trauma, and especially kids who have experienced neglect, you see architectural differences. And that compromises the areas of learning, memory, emotional regulation, as well as executive functioning, which is just a fancy term for being the CEO of yourself. It is understanding consequences. It's planning for the future. It's problem solving. And are all those things critically important for functioning? Yeah. So basically, a person's entire functioning is compromised. And you can imagine Anthony's first day of school, first day of kindergarten, if he struggles with emotional regulation, if he struggles with learning and memory, if he struggles with problem solving, he is going to struggle academically. What we know about these kids that have 3 or more ACE scores is that they have 3 times the rate of academic failure and 6 times the rate of behavior problems in school. So it doesn't just compromise the developing body. And I'm going to rush through these slides. But I want you all to know that it also it doesn't just compromise the developing brain, it also compromises the developing body. So what we know is that this chronic stress, where these kids are triggered over and over and over again, and they have higher rates of truly scary experiences, that it leads to tissue inflammation, which is the root cause of lots of diseases. We also know that it leads to accelerated cell death, which is the root cause of many diseases. And finally, we're really beginning to understand how it changes the way that your genes are read and transcribed. So if I can leave you with kind of a synopsis of how these ACEs and toxic stress compromise the biological foundation for lifelong health, it's that it hurts the brain, it leads to tissue inflammation, it kills your cells, and it changes the way your very genes are expressed, which is powerful. It gets so deep under your skin, right? And so what do I mean by changing the way that your genes are expressed? Did any of you see the article where they looked at Holocaust survivors and they've been able to map out the transmission of trauma genetically? Yeah, the kids of Holocaust survivors and grandkids, yeah. I mean, and that's the same principle here, is that we're in the infancy of beginning to understand that experiencing these levels of toxic stress actually can turn on genes that are unhelpful and disease-causing and turn off genes that would be good for us, just to put it in layman's terms. So that is powerful to me, incredibly powerful. This is the graphic that was developed by the original co-investigators of the ACE study to explain the relationship that we've kind of just talked about. So kids experience ACEs. It leads to neurodevelopment as well as the impacts on the body, which lead to social, emotional, and cognitive impairments, and eventually often lead to the adoption of health risk behaviors. So Anthony, experiencing stress all the time, doesn't have a safe place to be, basically has no safe, stable, nurturing relationships in his life. What do you think he's going to be doing at 12 and 13 years old? Smoking, drinking. I mean, every single thing we don't want a preteen and teen to do, this kid's going to be at higher risk for, right? And the whole reason is because he wants to calm down from the ever-present stress in his life. We have all got unhealthy ways that we cope with stress, right? Some of us, no need to incriminate yourself, but some of us eat a box of Twizzlers, some of us just binge watch TV. We have a whole cadre of unhealthy ways we cope with stress. But in addition to that, we have a toolbox of healthy ways we cope with stress. We call a friend, we go for a walk, right? We do those sorts of things because that's what's been modeled for us. Anthony has never had anybody to model healthy coping for him. And he has much, much, much higher rates of stress than the average kid. And so he's going to be your kid that starts smoking every single day at 11. And I say that because we, at the Family Center, our population that we target are parents who are incarcerated and struggling with substance abuse issues and involved with the legal system. And what I hear time and time again was, I started smoking regularly at 11. I started using hard drugs at 13. I started selling to my father at 16, right? These are the stories that we hear. Does anybody know when your brain stops developing? 25 years old. And the last part to finish developing is that prefrontal cortex part, the learning brain, the part that helps you with those executive functions, right? That's why at 21, you made different decisions than you made at 27. And you look back and you're like, what a difference 6 years can make, right? And so what we see is that these kids are using substances at a time when active brain development is still happening. And it compromises that brain development. It is adding insult to injury. All they're trying to do is escape the ever-present stress in their lives. And what's happening is that it's actually bringing more stress and compromised functioning to them, right? So what happens when you smoke every single day starting at 11? What does it increase your chances of? Lung cancer, heart disease, high blood pressure. The nurse sitting right here, she's listing them all off, right? We know smoking is bad for us, right? We know what overeating does. We know what all of those health risk behaviors that we adopt to deal with the stress, what diseases they're going to lead to, right? And so it makes sense that these kids that have higher ACE scores are going to adopt these things and struggle with social issues, disability, and health issues, right? And what you see at the very top of that pyramid, which is a little difficult to read, is the words early death. What this study found was that when you have 4 or more ACEs, you tend to die 5 to 10 years younger than somebody who has low or no ACEs. And what a subsequent study from the National Institute of Health found was that when you have 6 or more ACEs, your lifespan is cut short by 20 years on average. Incredibly powerful, right? So what we see here, we see those epigenetic mechanisms, which was what I was talking about, the changes in gene expression. And what you see down the side there is intergenerational transmission. And that's not just through those genetic or changes in the way that your genes are expressed, but also if Anthony grows up and he starts partaking in substances and he pops out 3 kids, what do you think that those kids are going to experience? High ACE scores. If you have 4 or more ACEs, you're much more likely to pass down a high ACE score to your own kids, right? But the very interesting thing about this research is even if you skip that step of adopting the health risk behaviors, which really is what we're going to focus on today, it still compromises your biological foundation for lifelong health because of what the stress does to your developing brain and body, right? The health risk behaviors, like I said before, just add insult to injury. So I am not going to read this list to you. But look up ACEs and look at the outcomes of ACEs and you'll realize that this is a short list, right? As I said before, 7 out of 10 of our leading diseases, basically all of our social problems, a huge piece of mental health, and especially a huge piece of substance abuse is connected to presence of high ACE scores. So Lacey's telling me that my time's running out, so I'm going to rush through the rest of this. What I want to show you are these graphs with the ACE scores. And what we know that we've looked at ACEs in over, I think, 39 states at this point, including Tennessee. But what we see is that the higher your ACE score, the more likely you're substantially more likely to partake in substance use and abuse, right? And you're much more likely to use illicit drugs and use alcohol, and that's self-report, right? It's like a stair-step-like relationship. The higher your ACE score, the more likely you are to abuse substances. And we see that with the Family Center. You know, we've surveyed over 1,000 parents through our parent education classes, and they are this population. And over 74% of them have 4 or more ACEs, and over 50% of them have 6 or more ACEs. Incredibly high rates that we see. So what are the recommendations from the CDC? Safe, stable, nurturing relationships. And why is all of this important? Why did I just take up 40 minutes of your time to talk about all of this? It's because if we don't start understanding what's motivating these parents to use and start understanding what's going on at a biological level, we can't respond in a trauma-informed way. And that is a critical component to getting our arms around this issue. We have to change the dialogue internally to look at these parents and say to them, not what's wrong with you, but what happened to you. And when we can join with them on that, and we can begin to truly change their behavior and change outcomes, that's when we make the biggest difference for these babies, right? And when we begin to understand what drives use in the first place, and we collectively come together to decrease ACEs at a population level, we will see a decrease in substance abuse. We will see a decrease in smoking. And we will see babies that are never exposed to substances while moms are pregnant, right? And that's the goal. Very quickly, I want to end here. This is my favorite slide as it pertains to ACEs because it really helps people understand the magnitude of this problem. So if you look at these pie pieces, these are some of the outcomes of ACEs. And if you look at the oil spill that's in the middle of that, the amount of the oil that is in each of those pie pieces is the amount of that issue that is attributable to the presence of ACEs. So if you imagine decreasing ACEs as like a paper towel that you put in the middle of that oil that sops it up, what you would see is a simultaneous and relative decrease in every single one of those problem areas, which is powerful for public health. And that's why I'm an evangelist, is because I want to see all of the things I care about be addressed, and they can be addressed many times through one approach, which is empowering parents to provide safe, stable, nurturing relationships to their kids. So what you see there, 24% of cancer, 25% of cardiovascular disease, 56% of anxiety, right? These are things that plague us as a society. So I want to end with hope again. A lot of times people hear my presentation, they go, oh my gosh, now I'm sufficiently freaked out. But to me, this is the pathway to hope because now we know what to do, right? We know how to address all of these issues simultaneously and move from marginal outcomes to massive outcomes. And it's by giving kids what they deserve morally anyway, which is those safe, stable, nurturing relationships. It's logically right, it's morally right, and it's fiscally right. So thank you all so much for hearing me out today.